Hey guys, this is Kristen Comstock with the Now What podcast, and we are here to continue our conversation with Pam. So, just want to give you guys a quick summary of the Now What podcast. We are here to talk about some of the hard topics like sexual traumas, adoption, infertility, fertility, motherhood, womanhood. We're here to talk about all those topics. And so we previously talked with Pam Walsh, who has experienced young childhood sexual and physical traumas. And so just to give you guys a summary from last time. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode, we encourage you to go listen to that first. But just to give you a quick summary, Pam had experienced at one point 4 different traumas from men, 3 of which were family members and 3 of which were living in your home at the time, 2 of which were sexual abusers, and then your father, who was more of a physical, emotional, and mental abuser. And then entered in a 4th abuser who was the bus driver to drive you to Sunday school. Right. And so you had 4 abusers. And so at this point, we really talked about you up into the age of 12 or 13. Your mom had your grandfather, who was a sexual abuser, finally left and was sentenced and went to prison. And your mom finally got the courage to leave your father, who was a physical abuser to both you and your mother and other siblings. And so now here we are. You had moved to Texas for a short period of time, and your brother came with you, and the abuse continued. And we talked about that at the end of the last episode. And so now we're in Texas, and you convince your mom, because as a young child, you want what you know.
That's right.
In Texas, you didn't know. You were in a different environment. You were living in a different place. Your mom was still working really long hours, and you were still experiencing abuse from your brother. And so you convinced your mom to move back, leave Texas, and go back to what you knew.
That's right.
Was home.
That's right.
And so you move back, and you guys move in. You had moved a lot in your young childhood years, and you finally move into your very first apartment, which really felt like your very first real home, right?
It was the nicest place we'd ever lived in. Okay. Air conditioning, it was clean, it was,
So you move back, and you're really excited. A new start, a fresh start. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, your thoughts were, maybe this time it will be different.
For sure. Yes. Innately hopeful. That's me.
Right.
And I'm so grateful for that. So we did come back. Now this time, it is now just 2 of the girls back. So it's just myself and my younger sister. And the siblings have now moved on. And now it's just my mother, my father,
and you and your younger sister.
And actually, my second older sister was actually meant to move in with us that weekend as well when we came back. But sadly, she committed suicide. And so
how long had you been back?
It was just a week or so.
So just a few days, you're back. You don't even have probably furniture and beds yet.
We have one couch, so we have nothing in our rooms. So I am asleep on the couch. My younger sister's on the floor below me. And I wake up to this sound that I had never heard. And once I finally come to, it's the sound of my father crying. And
you had never heard that before?
I had never heard that noise before. And so sadly, my older sister, Sandra, had taken her life just from struggling with a lot of mental differences, a lot of traumas as well. And
so just to give the listener a perspective or a view, a look into your life at the time, you went through years of trauma from essentially from the very first moment you can remember anything as a young child up into 12. Some of the abuse, most of the abuse completely stops. Grandfather's sentenced to prison. You guys uproot your lives essentially. Leave another abuser completely. You move. You finally are coming back to what you know as home, and you're like, here's a fresh start.
Yeah.
And within days. Enters a new trauma.
Right.
And a different kind of trauma.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that, as far as, you're 13, 14 at this point.
Yeah, I'm 14.
So you're old enough to understand what's happened, but how did that affect like your heart, and like what did you understand at the time?
Well, what I understood after my sister took her life was she had taken it partly because of everything that had been done to her, and then just absolutely having no hope that it would ever be different. I was angry. I was angry at my sister, but I was very, very angry with my father. And so that fueled for me this vow that my father, as long as I could live, and I was 14, and he had driven out every sibling by the time they were 15.
So just a pause there.
Yeah.
Every other sibling besides you and your younger sister had left and essentially ran away from home because they're not an adult yet.
That's right.
At 15.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
all of them, based on whatever, and again, we're not going to go through their story because we don't fully know them, but whatever abuses or things that they had experienced up until that point was enough to drive them away. And coming from the environment and life that you came from, I can only assume there weren't very many options as far as where they were going to go.
No.
Right?
No, not at all. The addictions, all the cycles all continue. The sexual cycles, addiction cycles, abuse cycles, it all just continued. Yeah. And so I just was so mad that I made vows that I said, number one, I would never see my father ever touch my mother again, physically abuse her. And number two, he was stuck with me until I was 18.
So, and that's actually another layer that we haven't even talked about, was the trauma of watching either siblings or your mom be abused. I mean, that's a trauma in it. That's another layer to the childhood traumas that you experience.
Right.
That you're layering. And so you made a vow. One, it's not going to happen again. So
that's
you
right.
had understood at this point in time, I am old enough to stop it. That's am right. Big enough, if you even really were, but in your mind, I am big enough to stop it.
For sure.
And then also, you weren't going to do what your other siblings did, which was leave the home. So I'm interested. I understand I'm not going to ever let him hurt my mom again. I get that vow. Can you explain a little bit more about the second?
Yeah.
Because I can only imagine if I was in your situation, I'd do the same thing that your siblings did, which was leave.
Right. But where they left was not good either. My brother went to the streets and he went to drugs. Ultimately enlisted in the Army. That was a terrible decision on his part. Because he was not about authority at all. He was hurt under authority.
Right.
My other sister, couch surfing, relationship to relationship, end up going into an industry that just exploited her. My older sister, the one that ended up taking her life, again, same thing. Roommate to roommate, job to job, homelessness, just
Which you're not in the safest environment.
I'm not in the safest environment.
She experienced some trauma. She experienced her own traumas from not being in safe environments.
Right. Yes, a lot more traumas. And so I just said, well, why should I be the one to leave? if he's not going to protect me as my father, then I can hold him to the law. And so I just had this switch in my head. Also, I honestly, I desperately wanted to protect my mom. I had started to humanize her and see her as a very broken young lady and little girl. And
did you feel any guilt that she finally left your father and then you convinced her to move back? Did you experience any guilt for convincing her to do that and then the same behavior continued?
I did. It was momentary. It was very momentary because this is what happened in such a short time. I begged her to come home, and she'll tell you she came back because of me. Now remember, I look like my dad. I'm the only one. And so there was this favoritism. I tell you, it doesn't sound like it.
The most favoritism in your house that you would
if anyone's
see.
getting it, it's going to be me, because just simply because I had red hair. But we come home. My sister passes away. I'm very angry because I don't want the same fate, not only for myself or for my younger sister. I don't want the same fate for myself to be pushed out of a house onto the street. And so the abuse so within a week of after that, maybe 2 after my sister's funeral, my parents were arguing in the living room about me, about my room. It wasn't clean. And so I was sent to my room.
Now, let's just pause.
Sure.
Let's jump into, step outside of the situation for a minute.
Right.
And let's just jump into real reality of a teenager.
Yeah.
What teenager's room is clean? Like, I'm just going to say, I would throw my clothes behind this like little love seat I had in my room because I thought my mom wouldn't know that I basically hid all of my dirty stuff. So my point is, they're arguing about something that in a healthy home life environment you might get in trouble for, but it wouldn't necessarily be a knockdown, literally knockdown, drag out fight over.
Right. And the fight was on my mom's argument was, she's a straight A student. She's doing well in school. She does her chores, so her room isn't clean.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't...
Which is a good argument.
It's a great argument. I have children now. It's a good argument.
Right.
Sometimes you got to pick your battles.
And regardless of all the other traumas that your mom may or may not have known about.
Right.
You just experienced a major trauma of not only losing a sister or a sibling at an age that you shouldn't lose a sibling to,
right.
But to suicide.
Right.
So that's a major trauma.
Yeah, I'm blaming my father.
And so your room's messy.
My room is messy. And we have found our way back to domestic abuse.
Okay.
Everyone's hurting in the house, but from my vantage point, I'm in my room.
And reminder, you made this vow.
I've made this vow. I'm not ever going to see the abuse happen. I'm not going to see him hit her. Abuse is not just physical.
Right.
So I made the physical abuse. I felt I'm 14. And somehow I became very invincible in my head. Redhead, stubborn,
right.
Call it whatever you want to. I was sent to my room. I was peeking out of the door. Again, this is just weeks after moving back from Texas. My sister has died. And my mom's back is to me. And I can see my father yelling at her. And my mother had a frying pan in her hand.
Southern.
Kentucky, shout out. And it was a cast iron. It wasn't just a frying pan.
She had the real cooking pan.
She had a full-on weapon.
Yeah.
And I knew it was in her hand, but the next thing I saw is my mom fall backwards. And so I immediately said, I thought, okay, he's hit her.
Mm-hmm.
So this is it. Here's my time. I charge out. out of my bedroom, and I run over and I hit my father. I punched him.
Wow.
Um,
What happened?
well, after the shock for just a moment, and my mother's shock as well, he charged after me. He was coming for me, screaming he was going to kill me. And so my mother had just put herself in between us. Again, I'm so scrappy.
I mean, she really risked her
literally
life.
risking her life because he's swinging at me. He's
Right.
trying. He is doing everything he can, and I'm just screaming, "Just get out! Just get out! Like we're done.
Right.
We're done." And so he did leave for not a very long time,
Short period of time.
maybe a couple days, and he came back, didn't speak to me for 1 month. Finally, I went to him at the dining room table and I said, "Are you ever going to speak to me again?" And he says, "I can't even look at you. I'm so disappointed because you hit your father." And I thought, you're right. I should not have ever hit you. But in that moment, the physical abuse, it stopped. It was done. It was done.
So now we move into you're a teenager.
Yeah.
You're becoming a woman,
Yeah.
or you have become a woman. You're on your journey to becoming a woman.
Right.
And you're experiencing all the things you experience when you're a young woman. And you have all these abuses and traumas that we've described. And at this point, you really want to escape your family life.
Yes.
And the memories of blank, fill in the blank, based on everything that we talked about.
That's right.
And all the things that we haven't even covered.
Yeah.
You've got siblings that have run away.
Yes.
You have lost a sibling. And you've already decided you aren't going to run away.
Right.
Which leaves you not very much room. Like, what are we doing with all the things that we've experienced, and how are we blocking this out? And so we're leading into what we're going to talk about, which is the promiscuity.
Right.
And so this is really the ripple of the traumas, if you will.
Right.
This is the trauma was the punch or the wave. And now we're talking about the after effects.
Right.
So talk to me about specifically kind of the start of the promiscuity. And promiscuity is not necessarily always, when we say promiscuity, we think, oh, well, they're just sleeping around, or they're just, having sex with all these different people. But promiscuity is not necessarily always the person's fault or doing, if you will. Sometimes it's just looking for that affection, which can lead to other things.
That's exactly what it is. It's looking for love in all the wrong places.
Right.
And with the right intentions, but the wrong behavior. But I didn't know different behavior.
And again, you hadn't had those healthy relationships modeled for you.
Right.
And I want to do a really good job, and I appreciate you being so vulnerable, because I know people that have gone through something similar that have never told. I mean, I'm one of like maybe 3 people they've ever told. Mm-hmm. And so I want to really bring awareness to what we're about to talk about, because it's not really talked about and it's really important. And so tell me about the process that you went into to escape your current reality and your past realities. You had this moment where you chose to lie to your mom and told her you were working or that you were doing something, and you were actually going to a party. So tell me what ended up happening from there.
My first party. I was so excited. And I was barely 16. I might have been just now 16. And I had a job, and I had a friend who invited me over. or invited me to a party at a boy's house. And I got there and it was so fun. There was music, people were dancing.
Two things that you absolutely love.
Love. And so I wanted to stay longer. I knew I wouldn't be able to stay too late. But so I called my mom and lied to her and asked her if I could spend the night at this girl's house. And that was not the truth.
Right.
And so just so I could stay longer at the party, I convinced her that I was going to have a sleepover. Put down the phone, and I thought, oh, this is it. I'm just going to continue to have fun. This is what a normal teenager looks like.
Right.
So I pick up my solo cup and I start dancing again to one of my favorite songs. And middle of that song, I have no memory. And I don't know how long I was out, but I did black out in the middle of that song. And then what I woke up to the next morning was a boy was on top of me having sex with me on a bed, and there was condoms everywhere. And I realized that I had been raped multiple times at that party. I was given GHB in my cup, and so I woke up, convinced a stranger to drive me home, and I get home and never to discuss it ever again.
So you experience another sexual trauma by multiple men in not just one night, but a few hour period, if that.
Hours. I don't even know, because it was at nighttime and I didn't wake up until the next morning.
Right. And you didn't tell anybody?
No. I went to a party. I chose that.
So I just want
That's
to
what I was
pause there. Even though we're talking about your story, I want to pause there now, right now, where you're at in your journey. What would you say to a young girl or a woman that has experienced either a rape or multiple rapes?
Yeah.
What would you say to them as far as them not wanting to tell anyone, or what they do with what that does to you?
I would say I had the same exact reasons for not saying anything. I believed that it was my choice to go to that party, my choice to lie, my choice to drink. And so I left and came home believing that that was my consequence to what I did. What I know,
and what the truth is,
and what I know the truth is that I didn't ask for that. In no way, fashion, I didn't want it. It is not my sin to carry, because it was a sin committed against me. Now, there is a truth that I know now that I have done, and that was ask for forgiveness to my Heavenly Father for making the choices that I did, to lie to my parents, to drink underage. That, absolutely.
right?
And I have not only asked for forgiveness, but I received forgiveness. That was my part.
Right.
That was my part.
That was your part. But you, and just to be clear on this, you didn't deserve that because you chose to drink. It wasn't because I did A, I get B. It's
right.
not a math equation.
It is not a math equation. From the enemy it is, but it is not a math equation. It is not. That is not
the truth.
It's not the truth. It's not fair.
You weren't wearing too short of shorts or too low cut of a top to
even if I wasn't, but even if I was, still did not ask for that.
Correct.
Did not deserve it. And let me just be very clear. Whether you have found yourself in bed naked because you think that you're ready to do something,
and you say that you're not,
and you say no, that you're not, then
you're not.
Then you're not.
Right.
And that is unjust, unfair, and not your fault. In my case, I was drugged.
Right.
There was no consent.
Right.
There was never a consent.
Right.
And so that's, yeah.
So, on the topic of sex and the promiscuity that came into play with the after effects.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine that this only made it worse because it's like, well, it's already happened now. So, like, it is what it is.
Right. There was no value on my part to that I had any value attached to
sex,
my virginity or
right,
sex.
because it had been taken from you.
It's been taken
Right.
from me. It has been shown that it's not valued. I have
Right.
only been shown that over and over again,
Right.
that it wasn't something that I was supposed to value. It was something I was
duty
supposed
or-
to give
Right.
in order for attention by any man, whatever attention it was, that I had to lead with that. And I didn't, and it wasn't even my choice
Right.
whether I got to give it or not.
Right.
It was an expectation.
Right.
It was, in a sense, a curse to me to be born female.
Okay.
Because I just thought, if I didn't have these parts, then I maybe could have a chance for
Right.
someone to love me, the inside of me. But that girl just didn't get to come out.
Right.
Yeah.
So staying on that topic, and I'm gonna use choice loosely only because, you know, when you bring in the complexities of the traumas, like you said, it's a choice, but it's not a choice. The promiscuity was entered in from the traumas. But when was the first time, you know, you had the rapes, when was the first time that you chose to have sex, and what was that experience like, and what did it bring about actually choosing to do it, even if you didn't really want to and you felt like it was something you had to do, but you still chose to do it? What was that like?
Well, I thought because I had waited, I thought because I had waited some magical time,
Right.
that the outcome was going to be different. So that just, again, I'm just going from relationship to relationship, and I'm looking for something that is not there, because I believe that sex has to be part of the equation eventually.
Because it's what you've been taught.
And every time that I had sex, it just covered up my identity more and more. It just put me, who I was on the inside, that I was desperately trying to show somebody, it just put me back further and further away, because it was just leading with just this body,
Right.
and how I was, you know, performing or acting or dressing or how I looked.
Right.
It was all just outward stuff.
And did it tend to bring hurtful emotions up to the surface, even though it was something that you were choosing to do based on what you've gone through at this point? I mean,
It's just so disappointing, because I never met anybody that didn't have that expectation.
yeah.
And for the next 7, 8, 9, 10, 5 years, this is my life, jumping from one relationship, and then ultimately experiencing more trauma out of the promiscuity.
So let's pause there for a second. Let's talk about some of the other non-physical pieces. Let's talk about some of the emotional pieces. All of these traumas up until this point, and now you're a teenager and you're moving into your early adulthood. What were some of the other effects? Did you experience depression,
Yes.
anxiety,
Yeah.
suicidal thoughts?
Sure.
What were some of the mental, emotional I mean, you were even experiencing spiritual things, whether you were saved at that point or you weren't, but this was all coming up to the surface. So what were some of those other effects besides the promiscuity and the physical effects of the childhood traumas and the sexual traumas?
So yes, so I 100% experiencing depression because I was walking in so much guilt, so much shame, and it just a constant trauma to trauma, always reacting and responding to traumas, never having really time to develop myself. I only have it out of the lens of just everything that I have been taught at that point. And so another thing that came out of that, other than just the emotional crisis that I was in inside, I was just so tormented because I had this one person that wanted to be one way, and I had this other person that did not die because I didn't know she, I thought this is what she had to do. And,
right. Just a shell of a person, really.
It was. Out of that, I ended up having 2 abortions, which fed even more guilt, more shame. Regret. And then ultimately coming up with a mentality that says, I can't trust anyone. And so I was on a mission to get people before they got me. So I would go out, I would date you for a little bit, but I would turn it and be cold and leave before they even had a chance to leave.
Right.
And somehow create this persona that I was just cold as ice. I didn't feel. I just stuffed it all away.
And again, that's the shell part, and not who God created you to be part.
I close my eyes at night. I have post-traumatic racing thoughts in my head at night. I am overly controlling about certain things in my life because I'm making vows in my life that says I'll never let a man hurt me, I'll never let a man abuse me, I will never be in poverty again, I will never go without something to eat. What
about the vows of, would you ever make vows kind of on the opposite spectrum so that you weren't hurt of, I will never let a man fully love me, or correct, I will never love a man?
That's right.
Like, did you make any of those vows?
I had hoped to love a man, but I just didn't know how that was ever going to be, because also what I saw in the mirror was a very broken, damaged girl.
Right.
I was a mask. I was a fraud of how I was on the inside. It did not match on the outside. I was a complete fraud. And the pretending life, what I thought was protecting me, was so damaging. My thought process and pushing people away, not getting close enough to anybody to let them in to hurt me.
At this time, had you seen any doctors? Were you receiving medication yet, or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
I did have. I didn't attempt suicide. It was very bizarre. I called. I wanted to get away from my life, and so I called a hospital that I knew took kids. I researched it from the Yellow Pages, and I found, and I called and pretended I was my mom, that I had a suicidal teenager, and what was my steps. So I sat my parents down, and I said, I need to go to the hospital. I'm suicidal, and you need to check me in. And I thought, finally, I'm going to get help. And so I go there, and I did try medications, and
and you probably tell them a little bit of what you've gone through, and they're probably like, oh
yeah, we didn't even have to get to the suicide attempt, which there was not one, by the way,
right?
Because my sister had committed suicide. So I have seen those effects, but
Right.
I wanted help so bad. I didn't know how to get help.
Right.
And so without saying, I wasn't believed before with abuse.
Right.
So to say that was the option to get help, I thought I better say something really extreme that they have no choice
But
but
to
to get me
believe
help.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to do a good job of summarizing, and this is not to do any type of disservice to your story, but it's just because I want to stay with the topic that we're currently discussing. But you end up getting pregnant and you have 2 abortions, and you also, your father gets sick, and you really become his caretaker in the end days of his life, and you are driving him to doctor's offices, and he ends up getting cancer.
Yes.
And ultimately he passes away, and you're able to get the best relationship you could have with him here on earth, you have with him at the end of his life.
Yes.
And then, and I'm just kind of fast forwarding here, but then we get to your early 20s and you become pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're talking through some of your promiscuity and stuff like that. And you go into the abortion, you convince your mom to take you, who ended up, she had turned her life around, and
Yes.
and so she did not want to do that.
No.
But you end up convincing her to take you to an abortion clinic to get an abortion. And tell me what happens. You go to get an abortion and you come out, and what had happened?
Well, so we walk in, and you should know she's crying and praying the whole time. I didn't know she was.
Right.
But I walked into the abortion clinic. She sat down in the lobby. I went back to get a sonogram to confirm how far along I was. And I was 6 weeks further along than I thought I was. And so when the technician asked me, "Don't you feel that?" I thought she was talking about the wand that was on my stomach. I said, "Well, of course I do." And she goes, no, the pregnancy. Because remember, they're very careful about their words. And I said, "No, why would I? This is what I thought I was." And she says, "No, you're this." And I was like, "All right, well, thank you so much. Good night." And I get up.
Right.
I walk out to the lobby. I look at my mom and I said, "Let's go." And she goes, "What's happening?" We get into the car and I said, "I'm having a baby and I'm taking this money that was given to me for an abortion, and we're going to go eat Cracker Barrel and go buy me some maternity clothes." And I moved in with her that night and had my oldest daughter.
And I really look at that when you begin to tell your story, and I know I've heard a much larger portion than our viewers will hear, but it almost, when you look at it from the outside looking in, is a spiritual shift that really started to happen in your life at that moment. Because at the time, you couldn't legally, correct me if I'm wrong, you couldn't legally get an abortion with how far along you were.
Or you could, but
you had to go somewhere
else. Yes.
So it was really this start to a spiritual shifting in your life. So before we wrap up, because we're going to continue this conversation, we're actually going to begin to talk about your adulthood.
Yes.
And where you're at currently, and some of the things that if you've experienced any of these types of trauma, that you can begin to do as far as healing is concerned, some resources. So we're going to get into those details. But before we do, as we're wrapping up, I want you to just tell me, for someone that has experienced the ripples of any type of trauma, specifically with what we're talking about, molestation from family members, molestation from others, rape, and they have begun the promiscuity and some of those more sexual leaning actions, if you will, what would be something that you tell them that you can encourage them to lean on as far as truth is concerned? And kind of like we've talked about before, some of the things that you do with work is really hoping and praying and God using you to where these women or young girls won't have to go through all the ripple afters.
That's
we
right.
can, really lean on the Lord in the very beginning so that we can change some of those trajectories.
Yes.
So what would you say to some of those women or young girls that are listening that have experienced some of these traumas, to help them begin to change their trajectory?
Yes. Well, I would say that long ago, before you were an adult, or maybe a mom, or maybe even a wife, there was a little girl who had, and still does have, a destiny. And mine was shifted. And that you have a purpose in this life, and it's not just to respond to sin. That it's never too late. And that it does not matter how you were raised, but it matters how you were made, but also how you were remade. And God, if you let him, can restore every bit of it.
Every piece of your image.
Every single piece, to that very moment where he was knitting you together in your mother's womb so perfectly.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we're going to end with a scripture. And this is one of the ones that you've given me that is near and dear to your heart. And that is Psalm 147:3. And I'm reading the Amplified Version. And it says, "He heals the brokenhearted, and he binds up their wounds, healing their pain and comforting their sorrow," which I love. That's in parentheses, healing their pain and comforting their sorrow. And so I think that's so beautiful for someone that's potentially beginning to walk through this or has walked through it, that he is there and he wants to heal the brokenheartedness in that person.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Now What with Kristen Comstock. Be sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.